Lee Hyeok said goodbye to two co-workers and got off the bus, a couple of blocks from the residential building where he lived. The young man raised his head and saw the full moon rising imposingly and beautifully on that early winter night, and after a minute he lowered his head and sighed sadly as he began to walk slowly and reluctantly towards his home. Almost 16 months had passed since that damned day that turned their lives into a nightmare, the day of the zombie apocalypse that destroyed their city, the city of Hyeok. The day the unexpected and violent outbreak of an artificially created virus in a laboratory had transformed most of their classmates at Hyeok High School into monsters and ended up doing the same to tens of thousands of the city's inhabitants. That day Lee Hyeok and his friends discovered death in the most horrible way. There is nothing more unnatural for adolescents than to think about death, at an age when it is normally seen as something infinitely distant and strange when in their minds they are immortal beings and eternally young. That is why confronting death in this way, seeing it face to face, desperately fleeing from it for agonizing hours, seeing their friends succumb to it, was a traumatic experience that turned them into adults in just a few days. In the end, the military bombed the city to stop the spread of the virus that would surely have annihilated the country and the entire world, extinguishing humanity. At least 40% of the city's population died and the survivors were confined to quarantine camps still under martial law. In the following months, things changed, but not much. Assemblywoman Park Eun-hee, who represents the Hyeok district in the National Assembly, had introduced a bill to partially improve and normalize the lives of the survivors, as the government and the majority of the assembly refused to fully restore them their civil rights and to let them leave the quarantine zone. Park Eun-hee herself had to participate in the assembly sessions online because even she was not allowed to leave the quarantine camp. The bill passed with modifications, and then the survivors were relocated to a couple of neighborhoods in the city that had been rehabilitated and had been sufficiently secured by the army to ensure that they were free of zombies. These neighborhoods became a kind of new quarantine camp, as they were surrounded by barriers and military checkpoints to ensure that no one could enter or leave without permission. And within the neighborhoods, the curfew and other restrictions were still in force, although it was certainly better to live in houses and apartments than in tents or in abandoned prison cells and recover something normal like walking the streets and shopping in shops, studying or having a job, etc. Lee Hyeok had the opportunity to go back to study in the dilapidated buildings where a makeshift high school had been set up, but he chose not to, because he was never a good student in the first place and because his traumatic experience did not allow him to go back to classes because that made his painful memories come out strongly. His psychologist didn't have to tell him to know that he had post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Instead of studying, at least for now, he preferred to get a job in the city's rehabilitation projects carried out by the city council. He spent the day working among the ruins of the most damaged sectors of Hyeok, his companions, and he always protected by platoons of soldiers armed and equipped to go to war. Even the bus that transported them was escorted by military vehicles until it crossed the border of the area where the refugees lived. A few days before they were working in the ruins of his old high school, and it was very hard for him. He remembered the hours when he and his friends ran through the corridors and classrooms of the school fleeing from monsters, the times he had to fight zombies to survive, within the fear of being bitten, and the deaths he had to witness, deaths of loved ones who would never return. But there was one memory that eventually prevailed over the others, a memory that aroused mixed feelings in him. It was the memory of that night, almost a year ago, when the small group of survivors who had escaped from the school and lived in the quarantine camp, sneaked out to visit its ruins, and on the roof of the building they were reunited with Choi Nam-ra, the girl he loved. It was a bittersweet reunion because on the one hand, he was happy to see that Nam-ra was still alive and had not died in the 4 months that had passed since the day they parted when Nam-ra preferred to separate from the group and enter the forbidden zone, tormented by the fact that she was about to kill her friend Nam-on-jo, dominated by her uncontrollable hunger. And it is that unfortunately, Nam-ra had become a hambi, that is, a half-zombie. And hence the painful part of the reunion, because despite Onjo's affectionate and sincere request, Nam-ra did not want to return to civilization with them, because she said that she had to continue what she had started, and that was to help others like her, other Hambies who survived in the exclusion zone. It was heartbreaking for Lee Hyeok to see her disappear into the night after jumping off the roof when all he wanted was for her to stay by his side. But he suspected that more than a desire to help the other Hambies, her strongest reason for not going back to them was a desire not to endanger her friends at school, and most importantly him because she loved him as much as he loved her. After that night, Hyeok and Nam-ra had met again a few times, in fleeting encounters, in which Nam-ra had appeared before him to chat for a few minutes. It could happen at any time, crossing a corner to go grocery shopping, or at his work, when at some point Hyeok was a little apart from his co-workers, and suddenly she would appear without making a sound to announce her arrival like a ghost materialized. They were bittersweet encounters, as both felt happiness and intense emotion when they greeted each other, and they greatly enjoyed those few minutes in which they could talk like two normal children of their age. But then it was heartbreaking when they had to say goodbye again, knowing that they probably wouldn't see each other again for several weeks. Then both of them couldn't stop the tears from welling up in their eyes. On a couple of occasions, Hyeok had asked Nam-ra why she didn't definitely go back to them, or rather, to him, and begged her to do so. But she explained to him in a very reasonable and convincing way that it was very dangerous. The military was relentlessly hunting the Hambies. They knew that there were dozens of them hiding among the ruins and forests of the exclusion zone, and although it was difficult to find them, surround them, and destroy them, the perseverance of the military was unstoppable, and they managed to cause casualties to the Hambies. Gunshots and explosions were often heard in the distance, striking fear into the human refugees, who thought they were cleanup operations for zombie stragglers but were actually extermination operations for Hambies. The military tried to capture alive specimens of Hambies, but their orders were to kill them if that was not possible, in no case to let them escape. And the Hambies were almost more afraid of being captured alive than of being killed, as they feared the torture they would be subjected to in the course of the scientific experiments that the government was surely ordering to carry out on them. This is why Nam-ra was afraid of exposing herself and her loved ones to danger if she hid in the makeshift quarantine zone in the safe neighborhoods, and because she was also trying to help other Hambies, assuming the role of a kind of the leader of the community of persecuted half-zombies. Nam-ra tried to help them survive, to keep alive the hope that things would change and they could reintegrate into human society, and above all to try to convince them to choose the way of life that she had adopted, giving up feeding on humans alive and eating wild forest animals. But unfortunately, there were many Hambies who preferred to indulge their impulses and feed on humans, attacking soldiers and some refugees, which in turn strengthened the government's determination to capture them all or exterminate them. But common sense did not ease the pain Hyeok and Nam-ra felt over their prolonged separation. He cursed fate, lamenting bitterly the injustice they both had to suffer, at an age when they should be dating and enjoying their first love. In their last meeting, a couple of months before, they had kissed each other passionately, in an alley near his house. It was his first kiss since the one they gave in a classroom at his school, in the middle of the zombie apocalypse, something that seemed to have happened an eternity ago. In the other meetings they had had after the bombing and before that kiss in the alley, they had not kissed because they had been very brief meetings and always marked by nervousness. But in that last meeting, they couldn't control their hormones and stop the desire to kiss. But for that very reason, that farewell was even more bitter. In the weeks that had passed since that last meeting, the anxiety had become unbearable for Hyeok. Each day he woke up with the desperate desire to see Nam-ra, and the hours passed in the midst of terrible anguish on him. Every minute he longed to turn around and find Nam-ra behind him, smiling at him with that particular smile of hers, a shy yet enigmatic half-smile that seemed to rise reluctantly on the girl's usually serious face that was a mask cold and expressionless for most people and most of the time but also seemed to show a concealed and suppressed sadness. God, if only people knew how desperately he wanted to see her, and if they only knew how bitterly he saw the end of each day without having seen the face of his beloved. If only they knew how deep his pain was when he went to bed, and how many times he cried into the pillow before finally falling asleep, his heart exhausted from suffering so much in her absence. It was a mortal agony that repeated itself over and over again each day. Absorbed in his dark thoughts and overwhelmed by his sadness, the boy walked in the direction of his house, as he did at the end of each day. Arriving at the building, he entered the elevator, to go up to the 5th floor where his apartment was. He punched the code into the electronic lock on the door of his apartment and opened it to enter, turned on the light, and took off his shoes, repeating the whole routine he practiced every night when he came home, only this time something would be different. "I've checked your fridge and I definitely think you should eat better," Namra said with a half-smile, with warm and sincere concern but trying to sound teasing, while barely containing her emotion. He reacted in surprise, seeing the girl standing next to his small kitchen. But a few moments later he was running towards her and he hugged her with a certain roughly, a strong and warm hug, the hug of one who clings to what he loves most so as not to let go. "Namra, I can't believe you're here," Hyeok exclaimed very excited and still incredulous. "Why are you surprised? I told you that I would come back to you as soon as there was an opportunity not to put ourselves at risk. I hadn't been able to come before because the situation was complex, but things have changed a bit. I always comply with what I promise," replied Namra trying to sound reasonable and serene but unable to hide the emotion that could be heard in her voice, while both were still united in a strong hug. "You don't know how I've missed you, Namra. Living without you has been agony," the young man exclaimed sincerely, while some tears appeared in his eyes. "The same has been for me, missing you has been my pain every day," she replied as she closed her eyes and a few tears ran down her cheeks. They both spent a moment that seemed eternal embraced, until she moved away from a little, while he held her by the arms. Then Hyeok was able to look at her and admire the beauty of the girl. Namra was dressed in a blue blouse with short sleeves, and a tight dark miniskirt that showed all of her legs up to her thighs. She was barefoot at the moment, but he looked away to see a pair of high-heeled sandals on the floor beside a large open window. It's the advantage of being a hambi, being able to scale a building in high-heeled sandals, while normal girls my age sometimes have difficulty climbing ordinary stairs in them without losing their balance, Namra said lightly mocking and ironic, with a wider smile. "I'd like to see you with them on. I've never seen you in high heels, in fact, I've always seen you in sneakers and I haven't seen you barefoot either," Hyeok said with the admiration of a boy in love and rapture looking at his beloved. "Later I can offer you a little fashion show, but now clean up and get ready to eat. I have prepared dinner with food that I brought for the occasion," she said happy and enthusiastic. A while later he was finishing dinner while she watched him with satisfaction and tenderness. "I didn't know you could cook so well, class president," Hyeok said with sincerity and joy, using the title he sometimes referred to her as because the girl had been class president. "There are still many things you don't know about me, I have many hidden talents, some from my time as a human, others from my new life as Hambi. You should see me hunting in the forest," Namra said mixing sincerity, mockery, and irony, "or maybe not," she added with her face slightly shadowed by disgust and some embarrassment. "To me, you are the most precious, with all your talents and all your flaws," he said lovingly, grabbing the girl's hand, causing her to smile sweetly. "When you're done eating and taking a bath, we can watch a movie, if you'd like," Namra said happily. "Won't you leave?" Hyeok asked in surprise. "No, I'll stay the night here, if you wish, of course," Namra answered with some emotion and blushing. Hyeok looked goofy and needed a moment to process the surprise. "Of course, I want to. I mean, of course, I want you to stay. I'm going to go get ready soon," the young man replied excitedly and nervously, and stood up and started walking with haste and clumsiness, so he stumbled and almost fell to the ground, so the girl couldn't help a little laugh. "I'm going to wash the dishes in the meantime," Namra said, still smiling. A while later they were both sitting on the floor and huddled under a blanket, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders and she laid her head on his chest, while they watched a movie on TV. Serene and sweet happiness was drawn on the faces of the two. "It feels so good," Hyeok exclaimed with a sigh. "What thing?" Namra asked even though she already knew the answer. Being like this with you, like a happy couple, enjoying a movie at home, snuggled up under a blanket, he replied. As a happy and normal couple, as if we really were a normal couple. Sometimes I imagine what it would have been like, if we had lived a normal first love, going on dates, like going to the movies, to karaoke, or to a coffee, walk together hand in hand, and that you accompany me to my house, and say goodbye at the door with a kiss on the lips, taking care that my mother did not see us from the window, said Namra of dreamy way, but with a certain sadness and nostalgia for something she lost before she had it. I dream of it too. I dream of walking with you through the halls of our high school, bragging to everyone that I have the most beautiful and cool girlfriend in the whole school. I dream of our dates, of all the happy moments we would have together, even, please don't laugh. I dream of our wedding, seeing you for the first time in your wedding dress and being speechless seeing you so beautiful, Hyeok said with some embarrassment. I didn't imagine that you were so romantic, a warrior boy like you, a specialist in punches and kicks. I thought that the romantic in our couple would be me, replied Namra jokingly but sweetly. Well, I didn't think you were a romantic either. When I met you you seemed very cold and insensitive, a true ice queen. I remember when I almost had to beg you to remove the earphones from your ears, Hyeok replied mockingly. And how do you see me now? Am I still that ice queen? Asked Namra in a playful and mischievous manner, with a roguish smile, as she turned her head to meet his eyes with an intense gaze. Now you're the only reason I have to live, you're the one I love, Hyeok said with an intense gaze full of love and his voice cracking with emotion. Namra brought her face close to his and kissed him on the lips, and Hyeok reciprocated. They both kissed each other passionately, with a lot of energy, eating each other's mouths. Meanwhile, they hugged each other and she straddled his lap. The girl placed a hand on the back of his head, holding it there as if to make sure he didn't pull his head away from hers. The kisses became deeper and more desperate as if possessed by an unstoppable madness. At one point, Namra clutched Hyeok's hair with the hand behind his head, then gently pulled him to look up at the ceiling. Then Namra ran her lips over the boy's neck, and to his surprise, she licked his neck, and then carefully nibbled a bit. She had to jerk her mouth away from him, because as she nibbled she tasted Hyeok's skin and the blood running under it, and she was afraid her zombie hunger would wake up. But immediately she regained control, and so she licked her boyfriend's chin, and then reattached her lips to his, and slipped her tongue into Hyeok's mouth. Hyeok felt like he was going crazy with desire and feeling the girl's crotch resting on his crotch, he couldn't help but get an erection. Namra was surprised for a moment to notice the erection of her boyfriend's cock, although the fabric of his pants and her underwear prevented direct contact with their respective genitals. But immediately lust took control of her as if she were a female in heat of a wild and predatory species. She began to make movements rubbing her crotch with his, causing Hyeok to close his eyes and feel the sexual excitement building inside him. Namra and Hyeok kept kissing fiercely, rubbing their lips together, each sticking their tongues inside each other's mouths as if they wanted to get back all the kisses they had been deprived of for months, while Namra got excited more and more, as she felt his erection. Let's go to the bedroom, Namra whispered in his ear, her voice heavy with desire. Are you sure? Hyeok asked, putting his concern and consideration for her before his own desire. Yes, I am. I want you to be the first and the only one, Namra retorted with excitement and desire, her eyes moist. Hyeok kissed her again, and after he stood up and wrapped his arms around the girl's body, he lifted her off the ground and carried her up like a newborn baby. She wrapped her arms around the young man's neck, and they shared a small laugh. Carrying her in his arms, he carried her into the bedroom. Hyeok gently placed Namra on the bed and before he finished she was pulling his t-shirt off over his head. The young man cooperated and then stood with his bare chest, while Namra slid the palm of her right hand across his chest. The girl impatiently unbuttoned her blouse and took it off revealing her dark-colored bras. Immediately Namra nimbly removed her miniskirt and threw it on the floor along with her blouse. Then the girl leaned close to Hyeok's ear and in a whisper from her asked him to remove her bras. Hyeok stretched his arms around Nam-ra, who was sitting on the bed, and with trembling hands unfastened the girl's bras from behind her. She too was trembling with excitement and her breathing was rapid. The girl finished removing her bras and blushed as she showed her boobs to Hyeok, who was looking at them with wide eyes. Nam-ra grabbed Hyeok's hand and placed it on her boobs. If you want to know the final part of this story, the erotic part, without censorship, access the link in the description of this video and you can read it without subscribing.